Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Beckwith, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Reader's Advisory Meets Collection Development, and to today's presenter, Dr. Stephanie Rollins. Dr. Rollins is a research and writing specialist at the Air University Press at Maxwell Air Force Base. She is also an adjunct professor for the University of Alabama and teaches digital reference, collection development, and organization of information, among other courses. Stephanie serves on both regional and state library committees, and she has 23 years of experience in academic and special libraries. She holds a BA in English from Auburn University, a master's degree in library service, and a doctorate in public administration, both from the University of Alabama. Please help me welcome Stephanie and enjoy her webinar.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. So today we get to talk about and look at two of my favorite parts of being a librarian, which is reader's advisory and collection development. Reference is also thrown in there too, but those are some of my favorite things to talk about, to read about, to teach people about. So today what we're going to look at is kind of this idea that reader's advisory and collection development play off of each other. And you really, I don't believe, can have one without the other. They both inform each other. Your reader's advisory is going to influence how you develop your collection and the things that you buy and the things that you manage in your collection. Conversely, or at the same time, your collection development policy can sometimes drive your reader's advisory practices, the things that you buy, the things that you put in your collection. So ideally, we're kind of looking for this sweet spot in between where collection development kind of meets up with reader's advisory, with the ultimate goal being that you meet what your patrons and your community needs. They are able to improve their literacy, get the materials that they need, they're happy, and they want to come back to the library. That's whether it's in person or online, whatever it might be, that's a true sign of success. So that's a little bit about what we're going to look at today. So this is just kind of a teaser slide for you. So on the agenda, of course, to talk about collection development, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. And if you've had some experience with collection development, it might be a review for you. Key to this is getting to know your community. In terms of reader's advisory, in terms of collection development, it's very important. We'll talk a little bit about that. I have a takeaway activity for you. If there's something about this that you would like to look at your community and kind of get to know your community again, it could have changed recently. There's some ways to do that. We're also going to look at talking about collection development policies and things that need to be in there very quickly. We'll also talk about kind of managing your collection a little bit and tidying up, because you can have new things if your shelves are overflowing, and that speaks to reader's advisory and your collection development policy as well. We'll talk about why reader's advisory, what it is, the reference interview, because that plays into reader's advisory. We're also going to talk about the reference interview versus reader's advisory. Is it the same? Is it different? We'll talk a little bit about that. A little bit of jargon. Of course, librarians, we love our terminology. There's a couple of terms associated with what all this is, and we'll kind of cover that as we go. Where to begin with reader's advisory? We'll talk a little bit about that. Some traditional and non-traditional resources. I always love to give you free stuff because a lot of libraries like mine don't have a ton of money. And how can you do reader's advisory, empower your patrons to do it themselves, or how can you do things for free? How can you also, as a reader, find things for free to help you with your own personal reader's advisory? And then another takeaway activity that you guys can do as far as role playing in your library. And then so to get started, we're going to talk again, like I said, focus a little bit on collection development. Collection development, to me, whenever I think about collection development, it's so library and even branch library specific, type of library specific. It's kind of looking into this great wide open, and it's kind of sometimes I feel like a rebel without a clue. But I think as we talk about collection development and go through some of the processes, some of the terms, some of the things that you need to think about, it becomes a lot more clear, because you are going to look at your community, you're going to look at your collection, and you're going to make this more clear. But it really does depend on your specific library and your patrons and your community. So just some basic terms. What is a collection? We all know this, but it's really everything that you have in your library, all formats, all genres, all types of information that you either purchase or you lease. And to me, there's kind of a little bit of a difference between collection development and collection management. So for me, collection development is kind of, you develop your collection, you build it, and you look at your community and your user needs. It's things like how you select, what your budget is, how you do outreach, and also includes things like how you negotiate your contracts for databases, and also work with state partnerships like Swiftland. So collection management to me is more about kind of weeding, what you decide to cancel, preservation, different things like that. So when we talk about collection management, that's a little bit later, but it's also very important to Reader's Advisory as well. But the entire goal of this whole collection development and collection management is really to meet the needs of your users and your library mission. So your turn. If you have a second and you feel inclined, why do you think we should focus on collection development? I'm going to tell you why I think so, but why do you think we should? And go ahead and type in the chat window, and I'll give you just a couple seconds. George is typing. Fantastic. Exactly. And I think, George, you must have read my slide. And yes, information is always changing. Absolutely, Colleen. It's exciting. I mean, you get to change how people use the library and what they need, and meeting that a challenge. Yes, bringing the community what they want and need. Fantastic. So this is kind of a busy image, but to me, collection development, collection management, the budgets, cooperative collection development, your marketing, all of that really centers around the users, your community. You guys are exactly on the same page with me. So all these collection management and collection development functions center around our love for our users, for our community, for our patrons. So fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And again, like you guys said, collection development is really an opportunity to make sense of it all. I mean, there's changes everywhere. The technology, our economy has, we had a recession, we've come back a little. People are nervous, right? And it's important to be able to think through these issues and make informed decisions. So this is what it used to look like probably back in the 80s, 90s. Things would get published, it'd be sent to a vendor, the library would buy it, and then the patrons would get it, right? Very simple. This is kind of what it looks like today, and there may be more layers on top of this that I haven't added. So you can, you have a traditional publisher, people are self-publishing, there's software, there's also institutional repositories. So it gets a little bit murky and cloudy and trying to figure out. So collection development is a way to kind of manage that. So what are some of the things that we do with collection development and management? To me, and some of these I've highlighted in terms of Reader's Advisory, that I think are important. They're all important, but really, for me, Reader's Advisory comes down to knowing your community and selecting materials that are going to meet their needs. It's also about managing the collection. You're making sure that you've got what you need and you don't have extra things, within reason. There's reasons for keeping things sometimes that aren't apparent. But it's also, planning and writing policies. So you have that written down and you can refer back to that. It's about marketing, and it's also about evaluating what you have. And then, there's a little bit of liaison and outreach trying to get to our people. So some of the tasks are, selecting and budgeting, communicating and reporting, and it varies depending on your library. When I worked for an academic library, I mean, I selected, but I wasn't responsible for the entire collection development policy. So depending on where you are, your functions may be different. The size of your library, the type of your library. If you need help, there's a lot of ALA groups and listservs and web pages that could definitely help you with that. So similar to my really simple image with the Reader's Advisory and Collection Development, this is kind of shows you some of the influences, some of the outside influences. So, we've got change, we've got our current situation. On one side, we've got the collection, and the other side, we've got the user with their community needs, and they have use patterns and demand that they're trying to meet, what they want. And on our side, we have our goals and objectives, which includes our selection policies and our existing collection. So there's kind of different forces at work, and we're trying to meet all of that. So what are some of the steps in developing a collection? You want to examine your local community thoroughly, and I've got an activity later if you'd like to do that. It's very simple. You want to study the users and their interests, right? Have a group that does readers advisory or collection development. Talk to each other. Make a note of what is getting the most requests. You want to write a collection development policy that defines the library's goals and objectives. You want to assess your current collection. It's very important periodically to do that to see if you're still meeting the needs of your user profile. Also writing collection statements, of course, creating a long-term plan are very important. You also need to look at your budget, which is often the hardest part, right? You have all these ideas and then you have to look at your budget and what's going to be purchased. And you also look at your reading guidelines. What do you want to keep and why? So again, why do we want to know our community? And you guys have hit the nail on the head. We want to think about our collection development and our readers advisory tactics and things that we're going to do. We want to, create new or modify services, maybe change service points, and maybe look at our physical facilities as well. Again, you can look at the attitudes of your community about your services and collections. You can predict if you're going to need more staff, and you can also, it will inform your budgeting process. So how can you get to know your community? So I've got some different things I'm going to talk to you about, and this speaks to readers advisory, but also collection development. So I think it's very helpful for both. So our assessment should focus on information that relates to the collection, and our collection is really based on our users and our patrons. So some of the things to look at are, who is in our local community, the size of the various age groups, the levels of education and income and areas of interest. And I'm saying all this, it's not a perfect science, collection development, looking at your user, reader's advisory, but there's ways you can help yourself. And so that's what I'm trying to do today is kind of help you get some ideas of ways you can look at both of those topics and see what you can do to get better at it, or to maybe help your library get the things you feel like you have a gap and you're not meeting exactly what your users need. Well, what can you look at to kind of meet that gap? Again, look at the local community library needs and then indicate what materials are going to meet that goal. So what kind of information is studied? You can look at historical data. Libraries usually keep that. They usually do user studies, surveys, different things like that. You can look at geographical information. Who is in your community? How far away are they? How hard is it for them to get to your library? And again, think about electronic. It doesn't necessarily matter if they just use your Libby and download books, right? But that's also good information to know. Do they have to take a bus? Is it a biking community? Those are things that help you kind of look at collection development, believe it or not. Basic demographic data, age, gender, how many kids are in the area. Economic data, what is their funding level? Are they going to be interested in things on finance, for instance? It's a huge business community. You just don't know until you look. What kind of communication systems are they using? Are they, a lot of large print readers, or do they like their things on an iPad? Do they only contact you online? That's good information to know. What kind of cultural and recreational organizations are in the area that you could partner with? And if there's any other community information services around. So how can you know your community? And these are some questions you can ask. So who are your users? What are their interests? What are their likes and dislikes? And then what motivates them to keep coming back, either setting foot in the library or visiting you online? So those are questions that a lot of this data can help you answer. Again, it's not precise, but it does give you some clues. So there's some methods you can look at. You can hire a consultant. There's a couple of links here if you want to look at that. You can pay for GIS data analysis. There's a great article in Library Journal that covers a couple of different resources that do that. I didn't include those slides here, but if you want to go look at that, they do some fantastic work and they tie it to your collection. I mean, there's all kinds of really neat things they can do, but it comes at a cost. So that's just something to consider. For me, I'm gonna advocate for free if you can do it. But there's things you can do in-house. You can conduct community surveys, hold small group discussions, one-on-one interviews. just when somebody's there, say, hey, what do you like about this book? Or what do you like about the library? Just, engage people in conversation. It doesn't have to be formal. Again, you can also, like I said, get things from free, available data from free sites. And you can also compare that to interlibrary loan and circulation statistics. Those will also give you a ton of information that will help you with readers advisory, because if you look at interlibrary loan and you don't have those resources, it'll spot gaps. And then circ stats, so you can see what's circulating the most. That'll give you some information. Use the information you already have at hand. So this is just an example of a sample community survey that I picked up. Something really simple you can do. You can also do a focus group, which is a little bit more intense. Sometimes you have to offer like a Starbucks card or something, or library swag. But again, it can give you a lot more detailed information. And then this is some of the free stats you can gather. It's very simple to do so. You can get information on population, housing, religion, health. Health is important because sometimes you might need to add information to your library that you weren't even aware of. Like maybe people in your community have, want to quit smoking, or they have cardiovascular disease. And a lot of the free sources that I'm going to show you will give you that information. Some of it's based on the census, some of it's based on other sources. But it's just helpful to know that. It speaks to your collection, and also when you're trying to do reader's advisory. Again, income, gender, age, education. What's their family status? Are you in a area that has a ton of kids or no kids? I mean, that's good to know. What race, ethnicity? Do you need to have other language type materials in your library? Are there people with disability in your area? Sometimes they need help with that. Also, veterans, is it a retirement community for the military? And then what types of industry are in your area? So that seems like a lot of information, right? But there's some sources here. These are some of my favorite ones. Actually, all of them are really great. This one, second one, the Association of Religion Data Archive, sounds interesting. Like, how would you get information from a religion archive? But it's fantastic. The American Fact Finder, which is of course the census. Again, the Community Health Needs Assessment is focused on health, but it also includes a ton of information, and it will actually help you get an entire report on a community. And then, of course, your own Florida Electronic Library that you have access to. There's a Demographics Now database that you can look at for Florida. So once you get your data, it's all great, fun, run the data, you get all the statistics, but you have to kind of determine, what's important. What are the key findings? And so you want to find information that validates the community's needs and assets. What you find in the community, is that what you find in your collection? Look at the trends in the data. Look at different segments across the community. And it also helps you clarify answers to the community's assessments, key questions, those questions we asked about. What do they need? Why do they come back? Different things like that. And so again, they should point to an asset or need of the population of your community. Some things will just pop out really quickly. Some of them are more, kind of an inference type thing, but you just need to look at the data. And it may be related to several categories: health, age, religion. Those may all kind of interact together. So again, use that information to document your kind of priorities for your collection and for readers' advisories. Like I said, tie these stats to your library usage data, your interlibrary loan, your circulation, your foot traffic. Also, I love data, but you can hire somebody or have a college student look at the data and kind of make it so it's a little bit more meaningful. And then what a lot of people are visual, right? So if you use charts and graphs, sometimes that gives you more information and it's easier to kind of see things like that. So after you interpret the data, or as you interpret the data, you want to ask some questions. What are the most important needs? And what needs are most relevant to the mission and experience of the library? And then how do we reconcile these conflicting needs? And then, again, what are realistic expectations? Because you can run this data, you can spot trends, but then your budget may not support that. So what are the realistic expectations for resources to respond to these needs? And again, reporting, like I said, people are visual. So this is, do you use the library first for a specific event or book or item, 65%? Browsing materials either online or at a location to find something new, unexpected, 34%. So that's interesting information. So again, if you display your data in charts and graphs, it's fantastic. And then what that helps you do is kind of you don't have to put this in your collection development policy, but it gives you, as a librarian, as the administrator, kind of a profile of your community, and it's just very helpful to look at things like that when you're thinking about your collection or doing readers advisory. So this is an activity, and at the end I'll put in all the links and the links to the two activities in the chat box, so you don't have to worry about getting this down. But it's kind of a way to kind of run through some of the stats on looking at your community. It's just an exercise for you. Okay, so also important to Reader's Advisory and Collection Development is to have an existing policy. And if you haven't looked at yours in a while, do that. It's a way to kind of ensure stability, to look at the historical memory of things you've done before. It's great for training for new people to let them know, hey, this is what we focus on in our collection. And it will also speak to Reader's Advisory because you'll know that if you find something for a reader, this may or may not fit our collection. It talks about the different procedures, ordering, different things like that. It informs your customers and it also informs your staff. And it can often sometimes protect you as well, which is censorship, different things like that. Or just, hey, we are going to have this book because we are into promoting the freedom to read. It's going to protect your collection development policy. So you need to make sure that you have one and that you've looked at it recently. It also speaks to priorities. What are you going to put in your collection? And again, that speaks to your community. It also talks about standards. Sometimes it'll talk about budgets. Sometimes it'll give a performance assessment and talk about, we did this much work and we ordered this many things. Again, sometimes it'll be an environmental scan, which is, again, looking at your community and that data. Sometimes it can be used for accountability. And then it's a great public relations tool. It kind of speaks to what your library does. And a lot of times people don't understand what libraries do. And so a collection development policy is great for that. So who does them? It just really depends on your library. It could be a committee, it could be a director, it could be your board, it could be your head of collection development. All different kinds of people do it in different ways in all different libraries. So this is just real quick. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I have seen, like 100-page collection development policies, and then I've seen 2-page. So again, it depends on your library and what you're going to do. But usually talk about the purpose, a little bit of background of the library, who's responsible for what, the goals, your audience, the budget. If you do things where you get things on demand, which is a fantastic thing if you can do it, where patrons actually put in requests for what they want. It can be expensive. Sometimes it'll talk about copyright, selection aids, if there's a cooperative agreement. And then again, acquisitions, how you guys handle gifts and exchanges, how you handle challenges to books. So this is just some of the things that are in a collection development policy that you may want to be aware of. And again, that speaks to Reader's Advisory because you'll know what you need to help them, and also, what is allowed by your collection. Okay, so just really quickly, talk about collection management. So these are, again, the decisions that happen after you get an item. And so it's important because of the condition of books, also your budget, space, and again, like we talked about in the beginning, shifts in the users, shifts in what the community wants. And so it can be weeding, it can be preservation or conservation if you have a special collection area. It can speak to subscription renewal, cancellation, or just getting something electronic. And it's also about protecting your collection. And a lot of times this can be a really emotional and political issue. So you need to have something in your collection development policy, and you need to make sure everybody knows what it is. So to me, one of the most important parts about managing collection is weeding. And I don't feel like it's so hard because we've paid money for these books, but you have to ask yourself, is it meeting the needs of what the community needs? And information changes. So there's all kinds of different words for weeding. It's, basically it's taking stuff out of the collection. And you do it because space is an issue, or it's quality, or it's not useful anymore, or it's not current. If you have, from a historical standpoint, a atlas that still has the USSR on it might be helpful historically, but you really want an up-to-date atlas. So, maybe you get rid of some of the historical atlases and keep, focus on more of the new ones. So it's just, again, it just depends on your library and what that atlas is. Maybe it's an invaluable atlas and it needs to go in your special collections. Again, it's not a precise science, but communication is crucial. Again, there's some criteria with weeding, the condition, is it used, is it outdated? And then sometimes you keep things because there's no other source in the community for these resources. They may be a little bit outdated. It may be something that's a special collection or something that was donated. So sometimes, the rules don't always apply to collections. Give me just a second. I lost my screen there. Sorry about that. Okay. So some of the ways you can do weeding, and I'm not going to go through these in depth, but probably one of my favorites is the musty, which means you look at the information. Is it misleading? Is it ugly, meaning the book is fallen apart and it can't be repaired? Is it superseded, meaning something new has come out? Is it trivial? Can you get it elsewhere? A lot of our reference materials now are free online. Or your collection doesn't have a need for it. It's a book on rocket science, and it's just not your library. That's not a really great example, but you get my point. And then one of the things I thought about too is, there's all this stuff about Marie Kondo, and again, like I said in the beginning, there's other considerations to think about too. But she says, tidy all at once, visualize the destination, determine if the item sparks joy, and tidy by category, not location, and tidy in order. So I just think about how that might apply to collection development, may or may not be helpful. So there's different ways you can do your reading. You can do shelf reading, title by title review. Sometimes your library system can run a report. There's all kinds of services you can pay for that will look at your services, or you can decide to do call number ranges by year. This is just a form that was in one of my collection development books that I taught with, and I kind of edited it a little bit. And it just kind of covers a bunch of the different methods at once. You'll get a copy of the slides, so if it's something that would be helpful for you, great. Please use it. And again, you can make a schedule. Think about what areas that you want to weed. Okay, so Reader's Advisory. We talked a lot about collection development, and we're about halfway through. So Reader's Advisory. Again, let me just type in the chat box. Your answers might be very similar to the things that you typed in for collection development, but why do we do Reader's Advisory? Why is it important? Yes, absolutely, Grace B. She typed all caps to help the patrons. Fantastic. Yes. If you look at this word cloud, you see readers is the biggest word, right? And it's helpful patrons. Reading, literacy, getting people to read is just so very important. And what do we want to accomplish? Again, we want people to read. We want people to be literate. We want to expose them to new ideas and new authors and fun, right? Yeah, absolutely, George. And fine tune the search parameters. Absolutely. I want a book about war. Okay, well, which war? Do you want people? Do you want the technology? Exactly. Fantastic. Yes. So there's no pressure here, I promise. You're not going to be expected. When I first thought about Reader's Advisory, I was like, oh, I have to know every single book in the world, which is kind of a naive thing, when I first started, but I didn't know. You don't have to know every title or author or genre on the planet. But you do, as George pointed out, need to fine tune the search parameters. And that's what if you're excellent at Reader's Advisory, you know how to do, and you know which tools to use. You don't have to read every book on the planet. You don't have to write a review or annotation or start a blog or take a quiz or change your style. You don't have to do any of those things. So there's no pressure. This should be fun. To me, this is fun and exciting, and I love talking about books. So really, what is Reader's Advisory? We're finding the books that readers want to read. And why? Why do they want to read these books? Why do they want to read a certain book or a genre? And it's about having an open mind, a positive attitude, being responsive, committing to serving the reader, and enjoying the conversation. Like I said, this should be fun. So a little bit of jargon. So really, Reader's Advisory is simply talking about books. You'll see the word appeal, and those are things about the book that appeals to the reader, why they enjoy the book. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. A genre, which is any sizable group of fiction authors and titles that have similar characteristics and appeal. They're also written to a particular specific pattern. When I think about that, I think about time travel books or romance, a lot of or mystery. There are some variations, and that sometimes that'll fall to in what's called a subgenre because there could be a horror time travel, right? So it's just kind of kind of how the book falls into a somewhat of a subject area. So within Reader's Advisory, there is a bit of the reference interview. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about that. I've had, a whole day spent on the reference interview and role playing and stuff. So I'm just going to talk through this quickly. But what is the reference interview? And this is an old definition, but I think it still holds true regardless of the medium that you do it in. But it's that interpersonal communication between you and a library user, and you're trying to determine specific information needs, which might be different from what they started with. It's can, like I said, in person, telephone, email, chat, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it might be. It can happen. And it's if you're good at this, a lot of times the person might be hesitant, but you can help them through that. So one of the things that spoke to me, and I call this my reference interviews in, is the 4 R's of the reference interview. And they don't really teach, writing cursive in schools anymore, at least not here. But you've heard about the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so Tykinson developed this set of 4 R's for the reference interview, and it's kind of reminds me of the Karate Kid movie. I've used this analogy a million times. So if you've heard this before, just kind of breeze on by. But it's kind of like it's a cycle. It's kind of a Zen that helps you. And it's really simple. And if you follow the steps, you're more likely to have your patrons come back, whether it's in person or online. So these are the 4 R's. And I'll talk through them again, like I said, quickly. But you want to reassure the patron, you want to respond, you want to reflect, and you want to repeat. So that's just very quickly. And so you do this as many times as needed. So the first thing you want to do is reassure. And I've got a lot of text here, but when you get a copy of the slides, this will be something that you can come back and look at should you need to. So reassuring is to make the person feel welcome, whether it's online, whether it's in chat. You want to, it's not a pep talk, but you want to give them that encouragement that they're at the right place, that you can help them. That yes, I'm sure we can find something on that. Those are all ways to reassure them. You want to respond. So once you say, hey, yeah, I can help you, you want to give them help. But again, a lot of our customers don't ask for what they want. So you need to ask open-ended questions and closed-ended questions to kind of get to what they're looking for. And sometimes this takes a lot of time, but it's also going to not waste your time or the customer's time if you do a great reference interview. So how do you ask? So you want to begin a dialogue. Again, they don't ask for what they want. They just don't know. So what you want to do is, for instance, if somebody asks about where the magazines are, when they really want to find research articles on genetic engineering, if you just ask for the magazines, she may not know that's her full question, but she asked for that. And if somebody just sends it, okay, here's the magazines, which we wouldn't do that because we know better. But that's really is not answering the right question. So open-ended questions, just in case you didn't know, because I always have people say, well, what is an open-ended question? Well, it's where you want to get a response other than yes or no. So it's things like, where have you looked so far? Tell me more about that. It's not a yes or no answer, and you can alternate this with closed-ended questions to kind of narrow things down. So closed-ended questions. Where have you looked? I'm sorry, that's an open-ended questions. Do you want books or articles? It's yes or no, A or B. Do you want current or historical information? And then near the end, a closed-ended question is, do you feel like you have what you need? So you can kind of close your reference interview. So those are what closed-ended questions are. And you want to be careful how you ask questions. There's neutral questions and then non-neutral questions. Like, what do you need that for? Saying that out loud does not sound as good as, well, how do you plan to use that information? You want to make sure that you're kind of neutral in the way that you ask things. And that's sometimes really hard to do. Okay, so once you've think you know what the customer wants, you want to state it back to them. And it doesn't have to be exactly what they said, but something like, so if I understand you correctly, you're looking for books by John Sanford that mention the Caribbean, da da da. You just kind of summarize, and then they may come back and give you more details. And then, like I said, you may repeat the process depending on what you have to do and the information that you get with the patron. And again, this is independent of any kind of medium. So how is it different than Reader's Advisory? In both, your goal is to identify what the person wants, right? Both use open-ended questioning and closed-ended questioning to kind of get what uh, they need. Again, you're going to look at print. You may look at online. You may look at local resources are available to support both kinds of interactions. But unlike the reader's advisory inquiry with its range of potential responses, usually a reference interview is more of a specific answer, right? Research articles on genetics. That's pretty specific, right? Um, a customer seeking reference help often has an understanding of kind of the direction they want to go, right? They may not know exactly because they haven't read anything yet. A reader, on the other hand, is a situation that does not typically, they don't typically know what they want, right? They don't know exactly what they want um, and the possible reading paths that are available. And they may not even know how to say what they like. So unique to Reader's Advisory is a discussion of a reader's experience with a book. And you don't always get that with reference, just the basic reference interaction. And also staff identify factors that appeal to the reader and translates them into a range of suggestions. So where do you start with Reader's Advisory? Some things to remember. You want to remember the First Amendment, which we're all fantastic at, but it bears repeating. Be a great listener. Again, practice the 4 R's that we just talked about. Part of that's asking open-ended questions. We want to offer suggestions. You want to close and follow up. That's very important to the reference interview and also to Reader's Advisory. Important to this is to learn about your own reading style. That's the fun part, right? You want to talk, you want to join in, pay attention, and you can get help from other resources. And finally, have no fear. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So the First Amendment, even if you don't like the questions your customer is asking about, it makes you not uncomfortable, but it's not the things that you like to read, right? Keep an open mind, and people have the right to disagree. That's the whole fabulous part about being a librarian, is that we can provide information to people so they can disagree. You want to become a better listener. Sometimes it's really hard to not finish people's sentences while they're talking, right? So be a better listener. Take a moment. Think about what questions you could ask the person. Also, what does the reader talk about when they're talking about books, when they're talking about what they want to find next? What is the setting, the pace, the atmosphere? What about the characters? And then I call this the feels. How does it make them feel? Anxious, excited. Are there lessons learned? And often, not always, but a lot of times, as you start talking to somebody in the reader's advisory process, they'll tell you exactly what they like. So, what to listen for? Descriptions of pacing. So this is things like it's a page turner, it's gripping, it's fast, it has lots of action, it's very descriptive, it's got a detailed description. There's a lot of research, or there's no research. There's descriptions of the story. It's violent, gentle, it's family centered, it's tragic, it's inspirational, it's racy, it's spooky, or it's thought provoking. Descriptions of the atmosphere. It's bleak. It's suspenseful, my favorite. It's upbeat. It's humorous. It's magical. It's romantic. And some of the other descriptions have to do with the cast and characters. He was a badass. Excuse me, I probably shouldn't say that word. Things like that. People will actually say that in Reader's Advisory. I didn't say that. The storyline, the length of the book, and the writing style. I think about Faulkner and how he wrote is completely different than anything I had ever read, right? So those are other descriptions to listen for. And again, like we talked about earlier, ask open-ended questions, and these are specific to Reader's Advisory. Tell me about a book or film or audio recording that you've enjoyed. Tell me about what you enjoyed about this book. Who's your favorite author? What are three of your favorite authors? Tell me why you like this book or author. Or can you tell me more about? And if you have a second in the chat window, type some questions that you've asked, and this will only help each other. We'll only help each other with this. If you have any other questions that you've asked that you thought were pretty effective in Reader's Advisory. So I'll give you a second to do that. Or do these pretty much cover it? You can just say, yep, they're covered. So Sarah's typing. Wait a second, Sarah and Colleen. Multiple attendees are typing. That's always a good sign. Thank you. So I'm going to go to the next slide while I'm waiting for that to come through. We want to offer suggestions, titles and author that they might be interested in. And you can use their feedback. Again, remember you're going to respond and then reflect, and they'll tell you, and you may have to go through this a couple of times, exactly what length of material. Yeah, sometimes I've had people come to the library and say, I want this book on this, but it has to be really short, right? Movies too, absolutely. If the patron's more of a movie visual person, they don't read a lot, absolutely, fantastic. Again, like I said, you can use their feedback to determine what they like. When you go to get the items, bring the customer with you. Now, this is more in person, right? But you can also provide a selection of books, but don't give them too many. That sometimes can overwhelm them, right? And be sure to let them know they don't have to borrow everything. They can always come back and get more. Again, they'll reject some suggestions and they need to feel like they can do this. That's totally fine. Again, they can leave books, say, hey, leave whatever you don't like, I'll reshelve it. And again, give them time to review the books in private so they don't have to explain to you why they like the books or they don't like the books. Again, you want to close and follow up. If again, this is in person, but it can also be through email or chat or whatever it might be. But follow up after they've had time to look at some of the selections. Say, hey, did this meet what you're looking for? Am I on the right track with you? Again, no difference if you're doing a reference question. Make sure they're satisfied and tell them you're always available if they need more assistance. Again, you can look at results from electronic and print research. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And provide any other information you think they might need. Like, for instance, a series of titles. There's a character. These are all the books with that character. And again, ask them what they liked or did not like the next time they visit, or they visit your chat, or they send you an email. And this will help you help your other customers. Again, learn about your reading style. To me, this is the fun part. And this also helps inform how you do reader's advisory with customers. Think about the last word you read. What words pop into your head? And if you have a second, type it in the chat box. Was it a place or a time period? For me, I just picked up this book called The Tattooist of, I can never say this word, I apologize, Auschwitz. And it talks about the person who, I just started it, who puts the tattoos on the people arriving. So it's a specific place, it's a specific time period. The book focuses on the person who's doing that. I don't know the name because I just started it. What are some of the issues, topics, conflicts, lessons? I mean, this book is all over the place with that. And the pace, it starts off really quick. And emotions, I mean, obviously it's got me emotional thinking about what happened to people during that time period, and it just being the 75th anniversary of the Holocaust. So anyways, I mean, all those things teaches me about my reading style and only helps inform me when I'm trying to do reader's advisory. So if you have a second, think about a book you just read and you can put the title of the book in the chat box. And then, it just helps your awareness of why you read what you read. And again, it helps you with reader's advisory. Again, talk, join in and pay attention. Talk about books with friends and family, which is really easy for us, right? Because I always, at a party or something, when somebody finds out you're a librarian, well, what books are you reading? What would you recommend, right? Join a book or discussion group. Libraries are fantastic places, but even personally do it. Always be familiar with the bestsellers. And then go to a bookstore and just browse and see what they have out on their shelves. What are they trying to get people to buy? And they usually do great marketing and they have reasons, right? They don't put, either they want to sell something because they have a ton of it or it's a huge seller and they want to make more money. Again, be familiar with your library offers, readers, and again, that speaks to your collection, knowing your collection. Also, subscribes to newsletters. There's a ton of things out there, and we'll talk about a couple of those in a second. So, how can you do readers advisory? When we talk about readers advisory, a lot of the things that we talk about are or think about is face to face, right? But a lot of people don't necessarily come to your library, and you'd find that out. You could find that out when you look at your statistics. You know, how many people are in your community, and then what's your foot traffic. So traditional methods like face-to-face might work for you. So that's how, you know, one of the ways that we're used to doing readers advisory. This is the Seattle Public Library, and they have a reading suggestions desk. And they've done a ton with readers advisory, and so I have a lot of examples from them. You can have, you know, displays and shelf lists. Like if you like, I love this little card series that they've done over here. And they also have displays for people browsing. So you don't necessarily have to go up to the desk and ask somebody for help because not everybody wants to do that. Sometimes they're intimidated. So this is a passive kind of way to get people to get help. So there's a lot of traditional ways that you can do readers advisory on behalf of the customer, but you can also empower them and let them search these databases. It doesn't just have to be librarian issued. So a couple of subscription databases that are really helpful. Um, uh, if you have Libby or if you have Overdrive, if you go into that, it's very helpful because it will actually suggest other books that are you know, might be your next favorite or similar to that topic. One of the things I found when I was teaching for Key West, I did a collection development readers advisory, kind of a mashup of eight or nine different topics for them, a whole day professional development. One of the things that a lot of people that work there did not know was that inside their library catalog, of course, you can click on subjects, right? But they also had a link that said similar titles. And what was fantastic about that library system was that you could see what was a similar title that was actually in the catalog. So you didn't have to go out and see, go back out of the catalog and then see if you actually had the item. So look at your library catalog and make sure and see if you have that option. Library catalogs have come a long way. Also, library catalogs, a lot of times you have a visual display and it'll show you books that are next to each other. Sometimes that's helpful as well. Through the Florida Electronic Library, you do have the books and author database. And so that's something you can look at. Your customers, you know, in Florida can look at it, and it's really nice. It can help you look at your next great book. It's got multiple searching and browsing options, and it has visual results. Novelist, some libraries have that as a subscription. It's probably one of my favorites that I used in library school for assignments. You can really deep dive into it and look at different genres. It's more of a librarian thing, not that patrons couldn't use it, but it just speaks more to us, I believe. Now, Booklist, when we talked about a newsletter, is, you know, in print and online. It's more than 200,000 book reviews. You can actually search it for free, but you won't get very many results. So you can kind of look at things, but, you know, to really have a full access, you really want to get the print edition or actually have an online subscription. Now, I did tell you there are a lot of free resources, right? So I'm going to actually show you a couple of them when we get done with this list, but I just want to walk you through a couple of them that some of them you may be aware of. Goodreads is fantastic. It's kind of a patron generated, crowdsourced, and it can be a little bit confusing because you kind of see other people's stuff, but they do have a something kind of like what's like a listopia where other users make lists of books under whatever criteria they use. And again, this is free. And one of the things you'll look at later that we talk maybe not so traditional is having your library profile on Goodreads, having your library there. The next one is called What Should I Read Next? This is probably one of the simplest databases. And again, all these free ones you can point your patrons to. A lot of people like to, you know, kind of do the work themselves, and you can kind of be a guide to that. Have them search it and, you know, work with them, show them how to use it. I think is fantastic. So what should I read next is really simple. It it's kind of like a where you type the book title or the author, and it recommends options as you type. And then on the book page, it suggests titles you might enjoy as well as a subject list that might be found in a library catalog. And so that's kind of really nice. Amazon has got it down on suggesting books you should buy, right? You don't necessarily have to buy them though. What you can do is you can look at the books that Amazon suggests, and then you can, check to see if your library has them, purchase them for your collection. So it just kind of gives you a little bit of information on that. This is Online Readers Sites Wiki, which is fantastic. The New York Public Library is another way. It's kind of an overview about how to do readers advisory. This Kitchen Sink RA I thought was super cool because it has genre tags linked. So those hashtags, with the pound sign, and it gives lists of read-alikes. So it's about 4 librarians, and they have some, for instance, they have a read-alike for the popular movie Elf or for fans of Taylor Swift. So it's just a little bit different interface, really kind of neat. The next one is Fantastic Fiction, and that one is has boasts that it has bibliographies for over 40,000 authors. And each author page has a wealth of information, including books by the authors, series they've written listed in order, which is very important, right? Similar authors based on the activity of other users and relevant genre pages. So it's really kind of cool. One I really like is called Witch Book. And what this does is um, it's fantastic because you can kind of um, you don't necessarily have to know the title or the author. It just uses some descriptors, and that's what I'm going to actually show you. So it'll make more sense when I show it to you. But it's kind of a scale, which is, and you can say you want it short or long, which is fantastic. Your next read is once you've navigated to a book's page, you'll see a visual web of similar titles around it. And you can click on a book and it will float to the center and be surrounded by titles that are similar to that book. So it's really great for visual people who like visual. Library Thing has been around forever. It's got 1 million users. It's kind of an alternative to Goodreads, and it allows reader reviews, book ratings, different things like that. So it's also another great one. Instagram. People have been really doing a lot with Instagram. It's a great place for visual pictures. You can put a picture of a book. This is a list we recommend. This is a book we recommend. So it's a kind of a cool way to do that. Ganooks, I don't know if you've ever heard of before, but it's called a global network of discovery. Basically, you put in 3 books and it gives you suggestions and leads. Very simple. Literature map, you put in the title of you put in an author and it kind of does like a mapping. It moves around. It shows you authors that are similar. And then a lot of times what people forget is WorldCat. In WorldCat, I'll show you that really quickly at the end. You can look at WorldCat and it will give you subject headings, and then you can click on those. And what's great about that is you're going to be able to see if your library has it. So we'll look at that in a minute. So what are some non-traditional methods? And you could argue that these really aren't non-traditional methods, but from when I started in library science, I was used to face-to-face readers advisory. So for me, these are a little bit more non-traditional. But there's things you can do for people, excuse me, I'm so sorry, who don't necessarily come to the library. And you can kind of do a little bit of outreach. And then you've got a record of it for your collection development, right? So this is a form-based reader's advisory. I'm going to show you a couple different ones, a couple different takes on this. This is called Your Next 5 Books. Looking for something big and fantastic to read? Ask a librarian. You put in your name, email, library card number, and then you answer a few questions. This is a different one. This is actually the email response to that form and just kind of gives you a sample of it. Again, Seattle Public Library does a lot of stuff. Again, this is the Williamsburg Regional Library. This form's a little bit different where they get to pick, types of material, genres, different things like that if they like large print. And then this is 5 for 5. This is the Cuyahoga Library. Sorry. And it's called Need a Good Read. And so it's just a very simple 3 titles and authors. Another thing is we've got to take advantage of Facebook and social media. This is, again, the Seattle Public Library doing outreach, looking for ideas for books to give for Christmas. Tune in tomorrow from 10 to 5. It's got a place they can do that. And then also, this is the Multnomah County Library. Uh, and this, what they did here is they said, list the last 3 books that you've read and we'll suggest your next read. Similar, very interactive. Also, you can put staff created lists out on Facebook, which is a fantastic thing to do, or you find a list on one of these other sources that I showed you. Um, Crowdsourcing, you get other people to talk about good books that they've read, which is a great thing to do too, and they post their books. Put it on the gram. I mean, that's the latest thing with the younger population that I interact with. And again, you can do all kinds of things. You can post a picture of a book display. Here's our spring reads. You know, it's fantastic. Also, if you have a library blog, blogs are still crazy popular. And people, you can do it for staff. Staff can post things. Authors can promote things on your blog, or patrons. You know, here's a book I read that was fantastic. Again, it's much more interaction. You might require a lot more. Also, take advantage of your community organizations and have them share or reshare. This is from the Seattle Times, and they shared about the Seattle Library's shelf that they had books on. Also, like I said earlier, put your library on Goodreads, put your library on Library Thing. So this is Scottdale Public Library's profile, and they talk about things that they've read, and you just, you know, follow them. It's fantastic. Also, libraries have pages on Pinterest. I don't use Pinterest as much as I used to, but you know, here's a list of films in the Florida Keys. That's a Pinterest page. And don't have any fear about this. You know, you don't have to read a book a day. Like I said, you don't have to know every library on the shelf. And really, the measure of your success is not whether the reader actually accepts your suggestions. Success is when readers realize that the library is a place they can go to talk about books and find things they like to read and not be intimidated. So real quickly, I'm just going to share my screen. We got about 4 minutes, and I just want to show you a couple of those tools that I think are especially helpful. So give me just a second, and I will share my screen with you. And I can still see the chat, so if you need help with something, let me know. Okay, so just a couple of sites I want to share with you, and I could do a whole webinar just on these sites. So if that's something you're interested in, just put that in your evaluation. So this is called Which Book. They do have lists that they generate. If you click on W lists, they give slapstick, bad luck and trouble. You can kind of mouse around and kind of get dizzy here, but they've got different book lists that can help you or your patron. Let me click on home real quick. But this is really cool. So I like mysteries and murder, and I know why I read these things because my life is pretty boring most of the time. So I know why I read what I read. So it's very, you can you don't have to know the names of any authors. You just click on this scale. So for instance, if I want to I'm thinking of a murder mystery or something like that, detective fiction. I could click on, I want it to be serious and maybe a little disturbing and unpredictable, maybe not so violent, you know, and then I want a short read, right? I guess there's not as many. Anyways, and you click on go and it's going to select some books for you. Best matches, good matches. You can look at an extract of the book. There's parallels, there's a profile you can find similar. So super easy to use, right? Yes, we are going to share the PowerPoint, Grace. And if not, you just email me and I'll leave my email at the end. But I believe that the recording of PowerPoint will definitely be shared. Okay, another one I want to show you is called Literature Map. So for instance, if I put in James Lee Burke, and it tries to help me because I didn't capitalize his word, but you can see that James Lee Burke is here in the middle. And John Sandford, I've read. I like him. I like Lee Child. I like Michael Connelly. See, they're all related authors that can kind of map and help you. The next one is what should I read next? And so I also like books by Nelson DeMille. Again, it requires somebody knowing the author. And I can click on search or enter. Give me just a second. Maybe I need to type his name again. Sorry about that. All right, so it'll try to help you find a book. I'm going to click on Plum Island. Taking a second. So these are all genres that you can click on, or different aspects. And there's, here's other books by him that would be interesting to you, or other authors. Again, really, really kind of cool. The other one is Ganooks, and again, this is one where you type in the title of 3 books. So if I say one of my favorite authors is John Sandford, one of my favorite authors is, okay, try to help me, James Lee Burke. Yep, and then one of my favorite authors is, let's see, Michael Connelly. And you click on continue. It says that this might be something you would like, a new author you might like. Of course, there's a bunch of ads and stuff, just ignore that. And so you can look at that and look at that author. This is kind of a really great site on how to find your next favorite book and some reader's advisory sources. Again, Amazon, really fantastic. It knows what I like. It's suggesting some books. I would take this, see if my library has it electronically or in print. And then, like I said, WorldCat. People kind of forget about that. And what's great about that is you can see if your library has it right there. Or like I said, look at your own library catalog, because you can click on subjects, you can click on characters. It's cataloged, right? So use the tools that we've put together through history, being good catalogers. So again, the title of my book is Plum Island. It's by Nelson DeMille. I'm going to click on Search Everything. Hopefully it saved this. I can click on Plum Island. And then down here, right, we've done all this work. We've done this work in our libraries. So treasure troves, fiction, you can click on that and it's going to bring up all the other books. I can click on John Corey. He's one of my favorite characters. So every book that's in WorldCat, most of the libraries in the world, is going to bring up every book by him. And then what I can do is I can click on the book. I can scroll down and I can enter my zip code and I can see, hey, the Wetumpka Public Library has it. Or you can type your zip code in and see if your library has it. So again, don't forget about WorldCat. It's free. We've done all the work to put things in WorldCat, right? So those are just some options. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Go back to my PowerPoint. Because we're about out of time. Okay, so please have no more fear about the Reader's Advisory. And last but not least, if you look at your collection development policies, all the information about your users, and meet that up with Reader's Advisories, you're going to get that sweet spot where we're speaking to our users, we're speaking to our community. So thank you very much. If you have any, oh, I forgot. So I did have one more role-playing activity for you. I'll put the link in the chat, and you also get a copy of this PowerPoint. But this is kind of a way you can interact and practice Reader's Advisory with another librarian, or your family, whatever you'd like to do, and it just kind of helps you get better at it. So I just call it, "Hey girl, about your last book," referring to the character, all those memes out there. But it might be something fun you'd like to do. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to paste the links for most of the stuff in the chat box real quick. But as I do that, please let me know if you have any questions. I'm so glad you learned a lot. Thank you so much. And again, like I said, I don't think that Reader's Advisory can exist without collection development. And if you don't have collection development, you can't really do Reader's Advisory as if you don't have that information. So thank you very much. And I'm really glad that you guys came today. And if there's something more about this presentation you would like to see, please put it in your evaluation.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, for
Thank you
such an
very much.
informative webinar. Attendees, if you enjoyed this webinar, we ask that you join us on March 6th at 10 a.m. Eastern for Stephanie's next webinar, Is It True? How to Verify Digital Sources Like a Rockstar. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on the Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your messages from the listserv for more training. Thank you for attending and have a terrific rest of your day.